January 28, 2010. Will the minute taker please call the roll?
Alderman Shockey,
Here.
Alderman Winger,
Here.
Alderman Eugene Wesley, Alderman Cadella,
Here.
Alderman Police,
Here.
Alderman Coles,
I'm here.
Alderman Roy Wesley,
Here.
Alderman Lewitton.
Here.
I declare a quorum. I make a motion to approve minutes dated January 14, 2010. Is there a second? On the question, Alderman Police?
Just have one correction on page 3, where it says, I stated that we received bids on Elmhurst. What I said was we received, the bids we have been receiving in general have been about 20% less than estimated. And that's why I suggested moving on with the Second Street and see if we still receive those bids. Sorry. Then we could possibly do a Second Street next year and save about 50% overall, get 2 streets done, and the following year, we just take a break or continue on.
Is there anything else on the question? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item is item number 4. It's a discussion of the wastewater treatment plant funding and review of alternatives for funding. And with that, Mr. Wilson?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. We have with us this evening Mr. Kevin McKenna from Spear Financial. He's done work for the city in the past on service areas 12, 13, and 14, and I believe preceding that as well. And he's here this evening. I believe you all received the outline what we're going to talk about for possible financing options for the wastewater treatment plant expansion in the packet last Friday. As I said in the memo, this isn't an exhaustive list of all the options. This is just kind of the more common options that other municipalities have used when financing a treatment plant. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. McKenna and let him go.
Good evening. On this memo, I thought we could just hit the highlights of the memo because it gives you a pretty good sense of what you can do. Now, one thing is, I should point out that these items here that we'll go through are all non-property tax ways of funding this. If you wanted to do a property tax like a general obligation bond, that's another possibility. You could do a small bond without a referendum, or you could do a larger bond with a referendum. But we had really pretty much focused on this being an enterprise fund and paying it out of enterprise revenues. So the revenue, the various kinds of funding mechanisms here, I list start with grants. I mean, everybody would love to get a TARP grant or some kind of a grant from the federal government because free money is good. And there are some programs out there. One of our clients today said that they had gotten $2.5 million for some of their sewer work. 25% of it is free, and the other 75% was a zero interest loan. So there is money out there. It's not a great deal of money. You're looking at a very large project, but there is some grant money out there. Also, because of the Recovery Act and federal government involvement, you're going to see some 0% loans. So that's obviously the best of all worlds. The next item is the state loan program, and this is pretty much, it's been pretty standard for the last 10 or 15 years, where the state sells bonds and they match it with federal government money, so that the cost is you get it through the EPA, and then the cost of the state loans is about 2 or 2.5%. It's set at 1/2%, 1/2 of what the state borrowing rate is. So right now it's someplace between 2 and 2.5%, and those are low interest loans. The experience we've had with our clients is that the EPA has a long list. They like projects that are shovel ready, but they don't tend to fund the entire project. Geneva had a project, I think it was around $30 million. They got funding 3 years in a row at $8 million each year. And so that was very helpful. They also, but they wouldn't give it to them all at one time. Now also those loans are 20-year loans. Once the project is done, you have to start paying it back, and it's 20 years, 2% or 2.5% level debt service, which may be difficult given your revenue stream. So like for Geneva, what we did was we sold bonds because the EPA loan wouldn't fund the whole thing. So for Geneva, what we did, we sold bonds that were 25 to 30-year bonds. So that extended the whole payback. So for the first 20 years, they're basically paying back the EPA and interest only on their bonds. And then the second or the third 10-year period, they'll be paying back the bond holders. That way they were able to finance the whole thing over 30 years, even though the EPA loans were only for 20 years. It's a little bit of a cumbersome program to apply for, but the cost is so cheap, you really can't you really can't say no to it. Those are kind of your two best ways of funding it if you can get the government help on that. The next, the alternate bonds or revenue bonds, both of these are you funding it. You go out and issue bonds. They're payable by system revenues. And they can be subsidized by other revenues as well, sales taxes or something. But basically, they're the alternate revenue bonds or whatever you want to pledge on them. The pure water sewer revenue bonds, those are paid by revenues of your system. Right now, in 2009, your audit indicated you had about $100,000 available to pay back any kind of debt service on this project. So that's obviously not going to get you very far on any kind of a payback, even at zero interest rate. But so the geo bond, the alternate bonds or the revenue bonds, those can go out 25 years. They can go out 30 years. They really up to 40 years. But there's 25 is about 25 to 30 is about the longest you want to do those. When you borrow on those, you have to have enough debt service to pay it back, along with coverage of about 25%. So on any given, you have to have projected that in a given year where you owe $1, you'll expect to have revenues of $1.25. That's for creditworthiness important, and also under the alternate bond statute, that's absolutely necessary by law that you have that. There's differences listed here. Alternate bonds have a backup tax levy. Revenue bonds do not. Alternate bonds do not require reserve accounts, debt service reserves, depreciation reserves, all of that. Regular revenue bonds do, because it's really all based on the bondholders only getting a lien on your system. Whereas the alternate bonds have this backup tax levy filed, which you are supposed to abate each year. On revenue bonds, like water sewer revenue bonds, all they've got is the system and the system revenues. Now, at the third paragraph of the alternate bond / revenue bond system, we put some numbers there. I mean, we tried to quantify what this would really cost you. So here you see that if you borrowed $38 million at 5% for 20 years, you're going to have to pay back $3.1 million. If you borrowed $30 million for the 20 years, it's $2.5 million. And at 30 years, if you borrow $38 million for 30 years, that's $2.5 million also. If you borrow $30 million for 30 years, that's $2 million. So that's just to, that you can juxtapose that with the fact that in 2009 you had $100,000 available to pay debt service. So it's just to give you a concept of how you're going to have to look at revenue stream for your system. Debt certificates, the last item on the first page, that's really just an IOU. It counts against your debt limit, which shouldn't be a problem because you have a high debt limit, but it counts against your debt limit. You don't pledge the revenues of the system. You don't pledge any revenues. You just pledge the general credit of the city. Those are they're pretty popular. I mean, there's no tax levy though. Again, none of this stuff has a tax. we're not talking about anything on property taxes. So that does not have a property tax. You have to have revenues to pay it off, but it's revenues that you need to figure out each year that would be available. And as I said at the start, none of these are really dealing with property taxes. Under the tax cap, you have the right to issue a small bond issue that could pay debt service based on your, you put it on your taxes up to about $800,000 a year. That's under the tax cap. That's your debt service. It's known as your debt service extension base. The amount of bonds you can issue without a referendum as far as general obligation bonds are equal to 1/2 of 1% of your assessed value. So today that's about $3.5 million. So if you want to do anything else, you have to go to referendum. But you could issue that if you wanted to switch from the revenue system or enterprise system to putting some of it on your tax bill. That would be up to you. The second page talks about the tax status of the bonds. You know, you're talking about a nice municipal project, so it's going to be tax exempt. You've probably read in the paper about Build America bonds or heard about Build America bonds. This is the most common kind of bond that came into effect last March. It's due to expire at the end of 2010. There's a lot of speculation that it will be extended. Basically, what a Build America bond is it's a system where you take a tax-exempt project that today you might finance over 20 years at, say, today's rates would be about 4.25%. But you make the project taxable. And then if you make it taxable and declare it to be a Build America bond, then the federal government will pay you back 35% of your interest cost. So you've taken this 4.25% tax-exempt project, you've made it into a 6% taxable project. But the feds will give you back 35%, which means your net cost now is about a $380 or a $390. So you save 1/4 to 0.5% in interest cost if you do a Build America bond. The theory is that the federal government loses money when you sell tax-exempt bonds because the buyer doesn't have to pay taxes on the interest you're paying them. And so they invented these things to be a way of offsetting the lost taxes from tax-exempt bonds. It's unclear whether the math really works really well. So there's a good chance that the Build America bonds either will expire at the end of 2010 or that they will be extended, but the 35% payback to the government who's issuing the bonds, that will probably be made smaller. It'll be decreased because it just the amount just doesn't work. I mean, in terms of it's too much of a good thing. They came into effect in March, and throughout 2009, there was something like $60 billion of these things issued. California issued 5 or 10 by itself. I mean, they were just great things, and they do save money. We've issued a number of them for clients, and you can see that the clients are saving money by doing this. There's no limit to how much of a Build America bond anybody can issue. There's no need for any kind of authority or anything. It's really up to the issuing body to decide whether or not you want to do that. But again, if you're not ready to issue the bonds, then you have to just wait and see what's going to be available when you're ready to issue debt for the project. Because certainly you'd look at the grants and whatever else first, I suspect. And I think that's really pretty much the presentation in terms of the kinds of borrowings that you have, the various tools that you have, and and obviously free money is better than money you have to pay back.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions, comments? Alderman Lewitton?
What does the city pay the writer of the bonds?
Underwriting fees average, nationally, they average about 0.6% of an issue,
How much?
about 0.6%. So $6 per thousand. Now, Build America bonds actually are a little more expensive because all taxable bonds are a little more expensive. Probably more like 0.8%.
Can the city do private placement? Are there any people that are that big that would buy that? And would the placement fees be smaller?
Usually placement fees are higher, and because you're not dealing with any kind of a competitive situation, usually you pay a higher interest rate.
Who would be the underwriter?
I don't know. I mean, you're talking a year or two from now. We had 2 sales yesterday. They were competitive sales for Downers Grove School District, and one had, I think, 9 bids, one had 5 bids. And as it turned out, both bond issues were purchased by M&I Bank, Marshall and Isley Bank from Milwaukee. But there's any number of bidders who are interested in this, especially if you do Build America bonds, because they're taxable bonds. You know, high-rated taxable bonds do very well, but there's lots of underwriters for that.
Very good answer. Thank you.
Alderman Eugene Wesley?
I have a couple of questions. The state loan program, you say that you could put in for that state loan program every year to get more funding for that?
Yes, yeah. I think what actually happened with like Geneva is they put in, they said, here's our project, and the state said, okay, we'll give you $8 million this year, and we assume we will be able to give you $8 million in the next 2 years. We just won't give you $24 million today.
But what I'm getting at is it's not guarantee you that if you put in for that second loan, a state loan program on, it's not guaranteed it's going to be there the second year or whatever. You can't guarantee me I'm going to get it every year.
Right, yes.
All right. Then the other question is, you said that the revenue bonds or one of the bonds that you'd be able to write that off on income tax?
Well, the purchaser of any of your bonds, the tax-exempt bonds, does not pay income tax on the interest that you pay. So when you issue a regular bond and a tax-exempt bond and it's 4%, whoever owns that bond does not pay interest on that. If you think about, I've already started doing my taxes. So if you look at the 1040, there's a little box that talks about interest. There's a little box that says how much tax-exempt interest did you read. But that doesn't get added to the income. It's just an information item. So that's what a purchaser would put into that bond. Their interest that they received from your bond would go into that little box. But the Build America bonds, it would be reported by them on, what is it, Schedule B, is it A, B, whatever it is, where it says interest and dividends, that schedule, and they'd write it in there, and they'd pay taxes on that. But they're getting 6%, and they're paying taxes on it, versus getting 4% and not paying taxes on it.
But you were saying those American bonds, if I'm mistaken, you're saying they may come to end by 2010?
They're scheduled, and they were put into effect in March of this past year under the American Renewal and Recovery Act, or whatever it's called. They put in a whole bunch of different kinds of bonds and different terms, and they said it all ends December 31st, 2010. Now, there's been a lot of discussion in the trade newspapers about that. They're so popular, they're likely to extend them. It's just unclear what terms they will extend them under, whether they'll still be the 35% or not. Because right now we know that if the city issued Build America bonds as taxable and got the 35% back, you would save overall about 1/4 to 1/2% on your bonds, on your overall interest rate. But if it got changed to, say, 25% back to you, it probably wouldn't make any difference. You'd be then ambivalent about it, whether you issued them or not, whether you issued them as just tax-exempt bonds or whether you issued them as taxable bonds. It wouldn't make any difference to you.
Can I ask one more question? If you go ahead and go out for referendum for bonds, say we need more, do you know if people could write it and their taxes go up because we went for bonds to pay for this project. Do you know if that will be exempt off the tax bill? Say their taxes go up
Well, it'd be like,
in price, their taxes go off
Yes.
to fund this program. Will they be able to deduct that off their income tax?
as long as they're deducting their regular property taxes, yes, it'd be going part of the regular property taxes because it's a tax of general applicability. It's used, the bonds are used for a project throughout the city, and that works. Unlike a project, like one of those special service areas where it's just for one little neighborhood or something.
Right.
That's something different. But here, where it's used for the entire thing, yes, it's deductible.
And Chairman, I might have a couple more, but I'll.
Okay, okay. So would you recommend kind of laddering the issues that we go out for, not just going out for the whole 38 million at once, but doing maybe 4 million each year as we need, projected to when we need the money?
Right now, that's probably, I think I made some comments in here at the end about, that's probably the best way, because what you have to do is you have to balance. You're balancing interest rates. Today, the interest rates are low, but the reinvestment rates are even lower. And so if you borrowed the whole $38 million today and you turn around and invest it at 1%, you lose a lot. You're borrowing at 4, you're investing
Right.
at 1. On the other hand, I don't know when rates are going to go up. I mean, I think probably everybody in this room agrees that rates are going to go up at some point, but nobody knows when. So if it literally becomes a gut feeling. If your gut tells you rates are going to go up in the next 12 months, then maybe you push that forward a little bit so you're not sitting there borrowing only $5 million a year or so, because ultimately the lost interest earnings are much smaller than the amount of interest you would pay if rates jump and you're sitting there having to borrow money at 7 or 8%.
Okay. Mr. Wilson?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. As we kind of hit on this a little bit, was it 2 weeks ago in the CIP? There are some costs before the actual construction that would need to be done in conjunction with the plant, some design and some engineering, things of that nature. And we base these numbers based upon the tentative flow of funds that SEC provided Mr. Graff a couple months ago. The first 2 years, fiscal year 11 and fiscal year 12, just $100,000 for pre-permitting and engineering and stuff. We would just pay cash for those as built into the CIP. Once you get into 13, that's where a lot of the design engineering comes in, and that's $1.5 million. The following year is $800,000. So that might be the place where we would want to, maybe do a small GO under the 0.5% or, see if we could get some grant money or something else smaller to pay for that, and then get into the $36 million for the actual construction of the plant itself. And to your question about just issuing all at once, or then also maybe, doing it in a couple tiers, part of it would be dependent upon what the state program would give us in year 1 or year 2, depending. And also depending how long the actual construction of the plant is, and Kevin, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, with some of these tax exempt bonds, there's spend down ratios that you have to hit. And if you don't hit them, then they become taxable. So that 4.25% money you got, if you don't meet the spend down requirements, boom, they automatically become 6% bonds because you missed it by 1 or 2% spend down, which can happen because of weather, if materials are delayed, something like that. So it might be smarter, even if we know we're going to build it all at once, to do it in different phases if we're trying to play interest rate games or wait for the state or something like that. And Kevin, you can correct me on some of that so there is some timing issues certainly with this we need to look at.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I was going to mention the spend down rules. That's true. There's a rule that you spend 85% in 3 years. Now, if you miss that, they probably won't make the bonds taxable, but there is a penalty. So there is a cost because what they're trying to do is get away from what happened in other times when people would just when municipalities would borrow the money, sit it put it in the bank and let it sit there for 5 or 10 years and keep the earnings. So there are financial penalties. Probably not making the bonds taxable, but they're taking a big chunk of your earnings.
Okay, thank you. And when is the soonest we can start applying for grants, or have we written a few, or how do we see us handling that part? When would we start that?
I would think that you want to do it when you start thinking about plans. I mean, a grant application they're going to look for plans.
And we have done some studies, so Mr. Wilson, what are your thoughts on?
From what I've understood from talking to different people, one of the biggest things, and Kevin is correct, you need a plan. And as we sit here tonight, the city doesn't have a plan. You haven't chosen which option to go with, and then even within which option, whether to do away with the Public Works Building or the Veterans Memorial. So you have to, first of all, decide which one of the methodologies you want to go with. I'm not going to speak for SEC here, but I believe there were 3 different methodologies to it, and then the 2 alternatives for where it was going to be constructed. So after you do that and then start to get the designs and get the plans approved, it's my understanding at that point you can go out for grants. But at this point, you can't go out and say, hey, we're going to build a plant, we want a grant, without even knowing what it's going to look like. And if one of the guys from SEC has a better answer than I do, then more than happy to come up and help us out here.
We'd just like to mention for the State Revolving Fund Program, you can apply, actually you have to pre-apply by March 31st every year. And you have to keep pre-applying for a project. And you can pre-apply with the information you have for this project at this time. So that's one thing I would recommend that the board consider is authorizing a pre-application to IEPA for the State Revolving Fund Program.
Okay.
And in that program, last year, that was where the 25% grant that was discussed earlier and the zero interest loan was through the SRF program. IEPA has indicated that there will be funds, additional ARRA funds in the SRF program this year, but they're not sure exactly how it's going to be implemented, if there is any principal forgiveness or what the interest rate will be.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson, does that sound like we can apply before March 31st? And if so, can we have that on the agenda and keep watching it until it's done?
I can certainly take a look at it and speak with Manager Dothwaite about getting that going, sure.
Okay, so either way, can it be on the agenda for our next committee meeting, so we'll know one way or another which way we're going and getting the ball rolling? On applying for March 31st.
Sure.
Thank you. Alderman Eugene Wesley.
Could I just ask one question on that? If I'm mistaken on the state loan program, we cannot apply for it unless we know if we're going forward with the project. How could you put in for the grant money if you don't know if we're going forward with this project? I mean, we have to make a commitment, I would think, for the state fund, because they are, I never filled out an application, but isn't that right that you have to have something saying, yes, we are moving forward before we even apply for this?
The pre-application doesn't commit you to taking those funds, but to be able to apply in the future and to complete the full application process, you have to have pre-applied. So the pre-application program is something that we really recommend that you pursue at this time, even if you don't use the SRF funds in the future. But it puts you in the slot with all the other pre-applications that are in there that they start prioritizing. And typically you will not get funded the first year that you pre-apply anyway.
So all it is paperwork to show that we
It's
got
just
a project that may be
It's
on
a
the books.
one-page
Okay.
application, paperwork to put in with a brief description of the project.
And that can always be modified. The description can change over time. Okay, thank you. Alderman Police?
I got a question on this first page where you said 20 years, 5%. This is providing we don't get any of this IEPA money. Is that correct?
Right, those numbers are just what number it says. So if you got EPA money, that would reduce it, obviously. And it's pretty linear. So if you looked at say the $30 million for 20 years and you got $10 million of grants or something, you could just take 2/3 of it and do 20 million.
But let's say, like you were saying, $8 million a year, the Geneva got or whatever. So if from what I'm understanding, this project's gonna take a couple of years to build this plant or whatever. So if we got $8 million per year at this, so out of the 38, let's say it was 38 million, just to keep your numbers here. So 8 million of that would be at 2.5%, and then the other 8 million each year at 2.5%.
Right.
So it's 16, that's 22 million, then would be at 5%.
Whatever the balance was, yes. Yeah, I mean, I'm using 5% because you're not doing it now, and it's a good number, but yes, that's how it would work. So, and given, who knows what the status is when you actually get around to applying, you may get some zero money, you may get some 2% money, and you may get some 5% money or 6% money. But it would all blend together, yes.
Oh, so we could get some 0%.
Alderman Coles.
Couldn't the city put out municipal bonds for this on the market? Like Naperville did? Naperville has something out on municipal bonds that are tax-free for the people on income tax?
You mean selling to everybody?
Yeah, everybody.
Yeah, you could. Those are infrequently done, but we've done them sometimes. It's basically it's good PR, but it's more expensive.
Oh, all right.
Because a typical bond is it's paperless, it's $5,000 pieces, and they get sold into the marketplace. If you start selling $500 bonds or $1,000 bonds to residents, it becomes it actually is a little more cumbersome. It is good. It's good community spirit, and we've done it in a number of places, but it is more cumbersome, and you have to then also there's questions about what happens if somebody doesn't want their bond. Are you willing to buy it back, or are you just going to tell them they have to go out and sell it to somebody else?
I just
yeah,
asked
yeah.
the question.
No, I mean we've done it, and
It's good PR if you
Yeah.
could get the people in the city itself to buy the bonds, invest in their own town.
Although if an individual wants to buy any of these bonds, when it goes to market on the day of sale, they can call the underwriter, or we've also done in places that said, look, if you think there's some individuals who want to buy some, have them call